So hello everyone, and welcome back for the next session, session 8 of the conference. I hope that everyone enjoyed that discussion this morning that we had on RSPP, and also were able to participate and enjoy the 3 showcase sessions that we had as well. Just a reminder, because those showcases were running in parallel, I know that you weren't able to watch all of them live, but all of the showcases from today and the other 2 days of the event, plus all of the sessions, the plenary sessions as well, have been recorded and are available for you to watch back at your convenience. So they'll be sent out. They're on our YouTube channel, and links are going to be sent out immediately following the end of today's proceedings, to how you can watch those back if you missed any of those. So straight on now to the next session. So we're continuing the discussion around spectrum. In this session, we're going to be looking at powering the revolution, progress, challenges and opportunities in the allocation and licensing of 5G spectrum, and primarily focusing on the 3 pioneer bands: 700 megahertz, 3.6 gigahertz, and 26 gigahertz. But to explain in a lot more detail, I'm now delighted to welcome to the stage our moderator for the session, Joanne LeMay from LeMay Yates Associates. So Joanne, welcome. And Joanne is actually joining us from over in Canada, so it's a very early start for her. So we do appreciate, Joanne, you joining us so early in the morning. So thank you so much. Looking forward to it. And actually, one thing before I pass over to you, one thing just to let everyone know is the audience polls. So sorry, I should have mentioned that. We have 2 audience polls again running. So please do get involved and give us your thoughts on those issues. Sorry, Joanne.
No problem. Thank you, Dan, and thank you for Forum Europe for this wonderful conference again. They work so hard to make sure that we get a chance to have those virtual events to all get together. So thank you and welcome everyone to this session, last day of the conference. And as Dan mentioned, I get the chance today to see the sunrise in Montreal, where I'm located. So I hope everyone is having a good afternoon now for most of you, or morning for those like me who are just joining in. And we have a very good session today discussing about the status of licensing for 5G. Like Dan said, progress, challenges, and opportunities. We start off, we have 4 speakers. Maybe if I can go to the next page, from different regulators from Europe. So Meta Pavsek-Taskov from the Republic of Slovenia, Alexander Kuhn from Germany, Christina Data from Ofcom. And we finish off with a view from the industry from Stuart Cook with GSA, which is last but not least in this on this very important topic. And after that, we'd definitely like to have a discussion with participants. We have quite a bit of time, and we look forward to having your questions. So maybe if we go to the next page, some of the issues that have been identified for discussion, and there may be quite a few more, but you're welcome to bring them forward. The status, of course, of 5G license awards. We have 3 pioneer bands and more. I know that there was a deadline of some sort for having the 3 pioneer bands awarded at the end of or for 2020. So I don't think many countries have achieved that, but there's been a fair amount of spectrum awarded. So we'll talk about that, the status of that. What about other potential bands I've put in here? Even 600 megahertz, other mid-band spectrum, more millimeter wave. After that, that maybe is a bit encroaching on the next panel, but maybe we can touch base on that. Network deployment and device availability. The impact of COVID, I think that's had some impact, definitely, for some carriers, so we can discuss that. The evolution of the perspective on millimeter wave. Up to now, it's been rather timid, I think, especially in the European context. The perspective on millimeter wave, especially if we compare with the US, where they've already done a number of auctions on millimeter wave, so we can talk about that. Also, other options available to regulators to award 5G spectrum. I think some of the things that we want maybe to touch base on is spectrum sharing or network sharing. Different models that are being looked at and implemented for sharing. The priority access licenses of the US, shared access licenses, club sharing agreements between MNOs. That if you would like to discuss that in the question. We look forward to that. And lastly, but maybe not least, is could spectrum auctions become less relevant in the context of increased focus on spectrum sharing models? Is that something we can see coming in the near future, medium term, or on the other hand, could the shared spectrum be actually auctioned off like they actually did in the US with the priority access licenses? So we can talk to lots of subject matters. Definitely, we have more than enough to fill the time allocated. And I'd like to move on and to introduce, give the first speaker, Meta, if you want to come in and talk about what you are doing in Slovenia, because I think you've been doing quite a lot.
Thank you, Joanne. Hello, everyone. My name is Mita Pavšek-Taško. I'm head of mobile service at ACOS, Slovenian regulator. And today I will present you Slovenian vision on introduction of 5G, challenges and opportunities in allocation and licensing of 5G spectrum. Next slide, please. Slovenia is in the middle of process of multi-band auction of 5G spectrum. Applications were received on 15th of February, and we plan auction for April. We will auction primary bands, 700, 3.6, and the upper 1 gigahertz of 26 gigahertz band. And besides this, as well, the 700 SDL, 2.1, 2.3, and the L band. Next slide, please. In auction, we will promote sharing. So active sharing and frequency pooling, including dynamic spectrum sharing, is permitted in challenging areas of Republic of Slovenia, and as well where there is a need of offering gigabit speeds. For example, in roads and city infrastructure, railway and energy infrastructure, in dense venues such as concert halls, stadiums, and so on. But for the 26 gigahertz band, frequency pooling and active sharing, including dynamic spectrum sharing, is allowed without constraints. Next slide, please. To what extent should commercial private 5G networks be considered to help meet the many varied use cases of different vertical sections? We have had public consultations and consultations with some verticals, and for example, for PMSC vertical and some similar verticals, we will have a local auction of parts of 2.3 gigahertz band and 3.6 gigahertz band, and we will auction it technologically and service neutral. And by this, we will try to enable smooth transition for PMSC to the 5G or 4G. And then we have already auctioned 2.3 megahertz for machine-to-machine, and we have spectrum as well for PPDR and business-critical verticals, and for industries, we plan spectrum in 3.8, 4.2, and in the 28 gigahertz band. Next slide, please. Slovenia has already rolled out to the 5G in 2.6 gigahertz band. Next slide, please. The COVID crisis showed the need for more spectrum, and this auction will satisfy the needs for next 5 to 7 years. But after that, we believe that because of new applications and investments in e-health, smart home, and so on, fixed wireless access, and popularization of unlimited data tariff plans, that more spectrum would be needed, 200 to 400 per operator. Next slide, please. And for this, we believe that the upper 6 gigahertz band is the best candidate. It has similar propagation condition than C-band, and similar situation with regards to satellites. And with licensed regime, the protection of incumbent services is easier achieved. Next slide, please. So vision of possible development of licensing coordination regimes. Licensing regimes for local networks could be flexible and maybe service and technological neutral. Light licensing regimes based on automated platform could be possible alternative in dedicated bands and for local usage. Possible digitalization of light licensing process could be based on artificial intelligence. Operators could be encouraged to invest in self-organized networks using artificial intelligence to configure and maintain networks allowing dynamic spectrum sharing. And when new sharing mechanisms between co-primary services and existing secondary services with unknown locations are developed and tested, digitalized sharing and digitalized coordination process within frequency band could be promoted. And the last step of process is digitalization of cross-border coordination process based on artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. So to conclude, there is a need for more spectrum in the next 5 to 7 years, and we believe that 6 GHz band could be the right solution. Dynamic spectrum sharing between MNO and verticals is promoted. There is a demand for local licensing. The four verticals needing network infrastructure, leftovers or harmonized bands could be used. For local verticals such as industry, we can benefit from economies of scale and use bands harmonized elsewhere in the world, but ensuring the protection of incumbents. And new coordination and licensing regimes based on artificial intelligence may enable in the future around 2030 better coexistence and shared use. Thank you very much.
Meta, that was quite a lot. You covered a lot of ground, and I'm sure that will bring quite a few questions later on. So if we go to the next speaker, Alexander Kuhn from Germany. Alex, if you want to take the floor. You're on mute, I think. You're on mute.
Okay, there we are. Thank you very much, Joanne. Hello, world. Good morning, Joanne, and good morning and maybe good evening to all the others watching us here at the 5G conference. Thank you for the invitation. I would like to bring you some aspects from our vision from the German regulator regarding the 5G spectrum licensing and allocation and our thoughts on the future. What is the progress? What are the challenges and the opportunities in the future? So I'm Alexander Kuhn. I'm Deputy Head of Section of the International Spectrum Matters section at BNetzA. So next slide, please. I would like to provide you with, firstly, with an overview of the awarded and auctioned spectrum for mobile operators in Germany. So we have awarded the 700 megahertz spectrum already back in 2015, and we have awarded also the 3.6 gigahertz spectrum, part of it, back in 2019. The licenses are still there until 2033 and respectively in 3.6 until 2040. For 3.7 to 3.8, we have authorized local licenses, and I will come to that later on. What is next in the pipe there, and all these bands are of course applicable for 5G usage, as all our licenses are completely technology neutral. And of course we have some thoughts and further work regarding a harmonized use in Europe, and we know that the CPT is working intensively together with the European Union in order to make all the least restrictive conditions available also for 5G. So all of these bands may be used for 5G in the future, and the regulator is interested that these bands are used there as well. What is in the next pipe from our side, as we are very lucky that we do not have any delays from the COVID pandemic right now in our award proceeding in that regard. We would like to move forward then for spectrum which will be available in 2025, and that will be most likely 800 megahertz, something in 1800 and 2.6. If you look to this particular slide, you will find the license duration always on top of the particular bandwidth, which is outlined in this slide. Next slide, please. So I said we have a particular point on 3.7, 3.8 for vertical usages. We started our application process on that one for local licenses back in November 2019, and up to now we have 108 licenses brought forward to the vertical industries. There are many different ones, so we have a huge variety of users here. It could be firstly the industry with their Industry 4.0 applications. We have also mobile vendors who would like to use them on their local spaces as well. We have broadcasters who would like to test and have internal communications, but also would like to use it for internal broadcasting communication. We have a lot of SME communication companies who would like to have some kind of campus networks. We have academia, so the universities are interested in the spectrum as well. And you see that there also they would like to use 5G hotspots. What we see here is that we have with 5G a lot of technological convergence with very different applications, and the thoughts that it may be useful to have the control of the network also under their own purposes. And therefore we have a lot of new spectrum users in the same area where the normal mobile public operators are working. And this increased the competition, which is something in which we believe is very favorable. It accelerates the development of relevant applications and innovation. It accelerates also the deployment of 5G and also the business solutions, and it provides also some new innovative solutions for the public and for the customers. So next slide, please. The next one where we are working currently on is the 26 gigahertz band. The application process started at the 1st of January 2021. Here we have also a similar process like for 3.7, 3.8. It's for everybody, so we will not auction the band at all. It's really an application-based process. We would like to work further in terms of a shared condition. We would like to protect the existing usage in the band that encompasses the fixed service links and also Earth observation satellite service, Earth stations. So there will be a new future utilization concepts with regards to the fixed links in order to ensure that we make a best usage of the band and ensure also that you can use both parts, the mobile service and the fixed service in the band quite efficiently and effectively. Also here in this band, we apply a technology and service neutrality principle, and we start the assignments from the upper part, so in 26.5 to 27.5 gigahertz. Also here we need to ensure that we have the obligation that every user of these bands need to negotiate with the adjacent radio network operator. So if they are very close by, they need to ensure that there is no interference or harmful interference into the different networks. Of course, we allow here also individual coordination, and we have also established some kind of use it or lose it principle in order to ensure that we have here a very efficient process, that the spectrum is always available to the market. And the first user information, similar to 3.6, 3.8, is available then in April 2021. Next slide, please. The next in our part is 40 gigahertz, which is, from our understanding, also similar usage conditions are likely as to 26 gigahertz. There is coordination required with the existing satellite service, also in the down part. So therefore, CPT is working on that one. We believe that this is an extension band which will come up in the next years. And we will have also on a license exempt basis 66 gigahertz, which will move forward. And there is just now the review of the technical conditions up to be finalized at the CPT level. So next slide, please. From our understanding regarding the challenges and opportunities, we need to find a good balance there between exclusive spectrum use and shared use. So Joanne mentioned already, do we need to have exclusive spectrum use in the future? We see that the technological convergence facilitates more 5G applications, maybe in the broadcasting sector. So UHF is an issue here, or ultra reliable low latency communication. Do we need to have specific bands, or do they fill some gaps? We need to have, of course, then to ensure the coordination between the networks, and that's a challenge then for the regulator to ensure it in its awarding of the spectrum. We need to take into account specific usage conditions, as certain spectrum users may require specific coverage obligations or usage conditions. And we see here that we have an infrastructure and application competition. So do we need to have maybe only one network operator in certain parts of the spectrum to provide more competition on the application side, or the other way around? So then we need to have, of course, infrastructure sharing, location acquisition, maybe a challenge, because the new spectrum will be always in higher levels. And we have emerging business models. So it's a very interesting time right now to see how 5G is evolving, and I'm happy to answer any question to your side. And finally, one remark to the mid-band spectrum. We believe that we need to have the studies available and then take the right decision at the right point in time for WRC23. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander. Obviously, you have been quite busy as well, and you have certainly a different, an interesting approach for the millimeter wave spectrum on which we can come back during the discussion. And I'm curious about what you mean between infrastructure and application competition or things of that nature. So we could maybe try to elaborate on that later on. The next speaker, third speaker, is Christina Data, Director of Spectrum Insight and Analysis at Ofcom. So Christina, please go ahead.
You're on mute, Christina.
Thank you, Joanne. Sorry. And thank you, everyone from Europe for the opportunity to join the conference. And good morning, good afternoon to everyone out there participating to this very interesting conference. We're going to take a slightly different angle and talking about enabling wireless in general, wireless innovation in the UK. Next slide, please. So for us, what is important is really making sure people and businesses, as this is an area of increasing growth, have the right connectivity where and when they need it. So from consumer being able to access on-the-move mobile broadband, and I appreciate there has been a little bit less move during COVID times, but that has not stopped mobile use, to actually different type of uses that support digital transformation across many sectors. Next slide, please. And this is an area that actually we have been focusing a lot more in the last few years, trying really to understand how wireless can support different industry sectors in their transformation, in improving productivity on manufacturing plan, in the oil and gas industry, in logistic warehouses, to reduce cost, of course, increase productivity, reduce downtime in the case of manufacturing plant, and also have a much more sustainable approach on the environment. Next slide, please. What I wanted to talk to you about is some examples. These are very, very early examples, and as I'm saying at the bottom of the slide, there are many more of what the UK government has actually supported in the UK through the 5G testbeds and trial programs, really to try and understand the different business models and the different opportunities of wireless across different sectors. And we've covered, as you can see from a map, the whole of the UK, from the Orkney Island in the north of Scotland down to the cities in the southeast of and southwest of England. So we've had more rural focused trials with the 5G rural 5G grid and with the 5G rural first. We've had an health use case in Liverpool to provide support to elderly patients and monitoring elderly patients in their home. We've had smart tourism in Bath. We've also had a manufacturing one, the Worcestershire 5G consortium between Bosch and Mazak to improve productivity through robotics and control of the robots in the factory, and also the auto air that is a sort of deployment in the automotive, very high speed, how the connectivity can be maintained with auto air in the north. No, I cannot really say in the north of England, more in the north of London. And many, many more test beds and trials have been actually supported by UK government. We've got the 5G West Midland, which is actually the winner of the Urban Connected Communities, to really create an area with 5G and look at all of the different use cases in that area. There are also many more on factory deployment for the factories, exploring the benefit of wireless, etc. So it's a continuously evolving map of different use cases being tested across the UK. Next slide, please. But of course, what all of these use cases have brought to sort of the surface, and is something that both Meta and Alex have already covered, is the variety of business models and solutions that can deliver that type of connectivity. So clearly, public networks being offered by MNOs or other have got a role to play, and particularly in 5G, we're talking about network slicing, so offering a slice of a network that deliver a certain type of SLAs, etc. To the other extent, a private network, fully private, fully controlled, core controlled by whoever is the owner of the private network. So completely different business model. And with many in between, we've seen MNOs offering fully private network as well in the UK. So if they all depend on the requirement of a business that is looking for a wireless solution to address what are their requirements. So different business model, of course, different type of spectrum, different spectrum bands. So next slide, please. And what we've tried with different type of spectrum is really making sure that spectrum is not an inhibitor to innovation, but is made available in a wide variety of under a wide variety of authorization and access models, and also it's scattered across the range. So you've got low frequency spectrum, mid frequency spectrum, and high frequency spectrum. So in the context of nationwide mobile spectrum, we have got all of the bands that have been made available for 2G, 3G, 4G. We've made available in 2019 actually the 3.4 to 3.6, the initial part of C-band for 5G, and we're about to start the auction process in March for 700 megahertz and 3.6 to 3.8. And all MNOs in the UK have already started offering 5G. Rollout has continued throughout the pandemic, and we're seeing some positive early adoption from consumers. We've also looked at unlicensed, so I'm leaving the shared spectrum as the last one, unlicensed and light licensed spectrum. This is again to lower the barrier as much as possible. We've looked at more spectrum at 6 gigahertz, so we've opened up the lower 6, and we've also opened up for what we call Pioneer, and it's another important area of our strategy, spectrum for Pioneer, the 100 to 200 gigahertz. In the middle, shared spectrum. This is something that we've done both with shared licenses and local licenses, and we can go to the next slide so I can talk a little bit more about that. So in the case of the shared access license, we're talking about 1800, 2.3, 38242, and 26 gigahertz. This is the lower part of 26 gigahertz in particular, and is only for indoor uses. We have received around 100 licenses since we've launched this at the end of 2019 for all different use cases, from manufacturing, logistic, mining, etc. And the local access license is a little bit the innovation that we have promoted, sort of understanding that there is a market out there to use mobile spectrum where mobile operators have not deployed their spectrum, and that's exactly what we've done. We don't have exclusive licenses, so we have enabled the ability for other players to access all of the mobile bands where they are not used for a 3 years period, because we thought 3 years was a good balance, and we take on board a little bit the negotiation with the MNOs to ensure that spectrum can be accessed and can be used. So clearly a lot of importance for us in a new shared approach, a new localized approach. So there is scope for national licenses. There is also scope for a local manufacturing plant, logistic warehouses, etc., type of solution. And that's exactly what we have made available. And we will continue, again, another very important area in our spectrum strategy to make available going forward. Thank you very much. Looking forward to many questions later on.
Thank you, Christina. I'm sure there will be some questions. I already have some that I'm thinking of, especially with the 3-year deadline for local access license. I think that is something of interest that we could discuss later on. Before we go on to our last speaker, Stuart Cook of GSA, I would like to remind all participants that there are two polls, or two questions that your opinion is requested if you would like to give it. So please do answer the polls, because they will close very shortly, so that they can get the results and that we can review them during the session in a few minutes. So next speaker, last speaker, but not the least, Stuart, tell us all how the industry and the handset manufacturers have been responding to all these bans.
Thank you very much, Joanne. And on behalf of the Global Suppliers Association, it's great to be participating in this session. If we could go through to the next slide, please. You know, this is a very high level slide, but it's important to remind ourselves about the basics. We have the low band, the mid band, and the high band, and it's that combination that's really important. So when we discuss 5G licensing and the state of licensing, we should think about the 3 bands. And you know, the low band's great for moving 5G or helping to move 5G out of the urban and into the rural areas, but also great for indoor coverage within cities, you know, those hard to reach places. So providing a great continuity of experience in the city, but helping deploy 5G outside of the cities. Mid-band, a great combination of capacity and coverage. A lot of focus in Europe on 3.4 to 3.8, but let's not forget about the other bands that are there, the 2.3, 2.6, perhaps 3.8 to 4.2 in the future. And then there's the high bands. A lot of discussion now around 26 gigahertz. CPT is planning on 40 gigahertz as well. So it's that combination that's important. Next slide, please. I'm not going to go through this in detail, just to show you from a global point of view. We've got 148 operators in 63 countries that have now launched commercial 5G services. So the rollout and the take-up is going really well, and in many countries exceeding that of 4G at a similar point in the 4G evolution. Next slide, please. You'll be able to see these slides in more detail after the conference, but this is a snapshot. So GSA has a lot of information on our website and in reports, but you can see the C band here, the 3.5 gigahertz, and the red and the pink indicates that it's been licensed nationally or locally. And you can see a lot of countries within Europe on the top right there have made this available or are about to make it available. But look at the Americas and APT and the Arab states, for example. Lots of deployments now in the C band, but also other mid bands are now beginning to get interest and traction. Next slide, please. The millimeter wave. Here we have the 26 to 28 gigahertz range. Europe's focused on 26 gigahertz, and also 40 gigahertz will be coming along later. And again, you can see in Europe, many countries have either licensed that, either locally or a hybrid model or a combination of local and national. And so millimeter wave in Europe, some countries licensed already, many more this year, and next year we anticipate will have licensed 26 gigahertz in particular. And lots of activity in the Americas, for example, as Joanne mentioned, millimeter wave deployments in the US, but Canada and Latin America have licensing or will license that shortly. So that's millimeter wave. Next slide, please. And then in terms of the devices, folks always ask about where are the devices? So the infrastructure is in place for the low, the mid, and the high bands that I talked about. And devices you can see here, millimeter wave devices are beginning to emerge. So we have devices supporting the upper 1 gigahertz as well as the complete 26 gigahertz. And so you can see just some of the devices there. So next slide, please. And then, you know, just to wrap up, let's think about the low, the mid, and the high bands when we talk about licensing of 5G spectrum. Let's think about how do we enable scale so we can get this market off the ground so that we can benefit not just the mobile operators, but those verticals as well. I think that's an important aspect not to be forgotten as we try and get 5G launched in all 3 frequency bands. And once those initial phase of licensing has taken place, now we can hear the discussions in terms of the WRC23 and planning for that additional spectrum to support the ongoing growth in the middle of this decade. So, Joanne, thank you very much.
Quite interesting. And as you were finishing your speech there, we have some of the results of our polling, which I think are also quite interesting. So we'll bring everybody on the stage to start our discussion. So maybe before I get to the results of the poll and all that, maybe we could comment or have comments for everyone. I guess most of you now, in terms of regulators, have awarded or are in the process of finalizing the award for 700 and the mid-band and 3.4 to 3.8 or parts of it, and fairly little on the 26. So do you think that you're in a good position now, or that in general European countries, EU countries, are in a good position for 5G? Or do you think that for operators it can be a little bit tight sometimes if you're looking for 100 to 200 megahertz to deploy 5G? Can I get someone to start off, or Alexander?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can start. Well, I believe what, from a regulatory perspective, the German regulator has done its homework on that one. So we brought the spectrum on stage. We have a good variety of spectrum availability there. The public mobile network operators have gotten their spectrum already in order to deploy and have the investment security on that one. And therefore, we are now looking to the deployment of the network, which is, of course, a challenge. If you go to higher frequency bands, you have at least a greater challenge really to get the infrastructure in place. That's clear, but we see that there is a lot of things going on. We saw already also the first indications that 5G is gaining more and more attention. You heard in the press as well that 3G is phased out in Germany, at least at the end of this year. So there is a clear indication that we are moving forward, and therefore we couldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't say too much that we've done it in a good way. There could be always improvements, clear, but I would say we've done our homework, that the spectrum regulator is not setting a barrier in order to the 5G deployment.
I would be curious, considering that Germany auctioned off the 700 megahertz a while back. Was it deployed for 4G LTE, but in most areas, and will then be kept for that for a while, or what is the status? Is it being used at all for broad coverage of 5G?
It is used for broad coverage. That's the clear part. As I said, well, our licenses are not technology dependent. So even if we believe and our calculations are based, and for the coverage obligations are based on a certain predominant technology at that point in time, the licenses can be used for 5G as well. And we expect that there will be movement towards from 5G technology as well. But we have to take into account as well that 5G is an evolving technology, so it's building up on LTE, and therefore, if you look into the details of the technology, my assumption is in 700, due to the limited bandwidth, we will see longer FDD LTE-A technology than 5G NR. TDD under 1 gigahertz makes no sense at this point in time.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you. Meta, maybe I'd like to ask for you. You mentioned in your presentation that you have, a few blocks of megahertz reserved for verticals. You mentioned the 2.3 gigahertz band, which I think is not everyone has mentioned, as well as in the 3.4, 3.8. So was there a good reaction to this spectrum in Slovenia for verticals, or can you expand?
Yes, actually, we were discussing with PMSC vertical and electricity vertical, and they have done some tests, and so we are hoping that we will auction this next year. Actually, this was reserved based on interest from the verticals.
Okay, so they express interest in that amount of spectrum that you have. That was, I guess, they assessed that was enough to meet their needs, and in terms of what they're looking for, because it wasn't like 50 megahertz or 100 megahertz. We're like, yeah, I couldn't see it for sure on the graph, but around what, 20 megahertz at the bottom of the band or something like that.
Yes, exactly. I mean, these verticals don't need much bandwidth. They just need reliability and ultra low latency. So I believe that they will achieve their needs with 4G networks. And on the other hand, the mobile operators express interest for larger block into the 3 gigahertz band. Therefore, we decided that way. But if any spectrum remains unsold, then we can auction it locally in the next auction for this multi-band.
Okay, and you will auction the spectrum for the verticals. That's part of your plans, right?
Yes, but we are looking now, when we are implementing the code, into possibility to have as well some kind of approach like Germany based on licensing, or maybe taking into account some safeguards done by UK. So we are studying this, but currently we don't have the possibility under current law. But the law will be changed, and we will propose something so that it will not be obligatory to have auction.
Okay, all right, thank you. Maybe I can, before I go to other questions, can talk about some of the results of the polls. I'm not sure if everyone sees them on the side of the screen, but the first question was, which sharing model do you believe will provide the most benefits for 5G deployment and usage? So I think we have very interesting results here. Priority access licenses, as was done in US for CBRS, 0%. So no interest at all among respondents. Shared access licenses, as done in the UK, 10%. Again, not great in terms of level of interest, but better than club sharing, as per the Italian model, which comes in at 4%. So not great. So far, sharing is not winning any prizes. Spectrum sharing agreements between MNOs at 40%. Now we're talking. That's a large minority, which we would say, of interest. And then 9% or close to 10% see no benefit at all of spectrum sharing for 5G deployment, which I think we can speak to that after. And the hybrid model, some of the band for local area licenses, another part of the band, and another part of the band, I'm not quite sure what that meant for, I guess, type of sharing, is 37%. So those two models really get the majority of the vote. So a lot of talk about sharing, but I'd say it's a mixed response, to say the least, from the participants. And I'm not sure what the score is in terms of MNO or regulators or what have you of the respondents, but not a lot of enthusiasm for different sharing models here. So could I have maybe Christina, you'd like to comment on this? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, thanks, Joanna. I agree. It's quite interesting, and particularly the sort of the highest score on spectrum sharing agreements between MNOs, and what in reality whether that will only benefit the MNOs in the end, or whether that could benefit other players. I can completely see the potential hybrid model. So considering part of the band for area licenses and part of the band potentially for other, I don't know whether it was awarded or anything like that. So we strongly believe in the need for what is local access to spectrum, and local in a way leads you to some sort of shared with somebody else, because I wouldn't award a nationwide license for somebody who needs to deploy in a manufacturing plant, for example. But I find quite interesting, particularly the spectrum sharing agreement between MNOs, to be honest, that part in the context of who does it benefit, and does it benefit also all the additional innovation that we're all across Europe trying to stimulate.
Okay. Well, I think there's a lot of certainly I've always seen a fair amount of competitive issues with network sharing and spectrum sharing, and I think there's a push to have more sharing from 5G because maybe of the huge lift that's required in terms of capital investment and deployment when you have mid-band and millimeter wave. I mean, it's really it's very, very expensive. On the other hand, I think most, maybe, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Stuart can correct me on that, but the industry or many operators are not always that keen on network and spectrum sharing. I certainly think that here, if I speak from a North American experience for a second, in Canada, we've had a fair amount of network sharing actually up to now, 4G networks, and but some on the 5G are actually moving away from network sharing, which would seem counterintuitive. And I cannot not mention that yesterday it was revealed, the final result of the C-band auction were revealed by the FCC, and we saw that Verizon, which used to be spectrum poor, and which some people say has been coroned by this 5G business case has been coroned, actually now bought an average of 170 megahertz, which would be contiguous spectrum in the 3.8 to 4.2. So obviously seeing a lot for $45 billion just on only that. So obviously seeing a lot of value in having exclusive spectrum. So our regulators, what does the industry think, Stuart, about this, the spectrum sharing or the network sharing in that context?
Yeah, that's a great question, isn't it, to the industry? And
yeah. You can have different perspective among operators, of course, very different perspective.
So there are different types of. We're getting a lot of that. I don't know about you. Maybe Meta, if you could. That's better. So there's a lot of different models, aren't there, for sharing? And as a vendor organization, we would say this, right? But we need scale to get this market off the ground. We are at a very early stage in 5G, both for mid-band, low-band, and high bands. And we have to put the mobile operators at the center of this to get that scale for infra, for devices, for chipsets. And then in terms of the so-called verticals, that scale can then be leveraged to benefit those verticals, whether it's a manufacturing plant or a sports stadium or wherever it is. So we have to get the mobile operators involved and licensed in a way that they can bring scale. And then in terms of the verticals, the factories, for example, there are some, I guess, large companies that have that technical capability to deploy perhaps their own 5G networks, but that's tough. It's not an easy thing to do. And there are a whole load of SMEs that would benefit from 5G, but don't have that technical capability perhaps to do their own 5G network, but they could then leverage either the mobile network operators or perhaps another third party to do that service. So it's not as simple as one or the other, but we really need to get the mobile operators involved, and then there's different models that we can then leverage to get the SMEs and the so-called private industries involved. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. So maybe as we're on the subject of network sharing and local access and licenses and all that, I would jump to some questions from the audience. And one relates, I guess, to Alex. You mentioned, and I had that question too. This is it's from Stephen Pendlin at Vodafone. 3.7 gigahertz in Germany, 108 licenses. He says equals 108 locations where the reserve spectrum is used, compared with 20,000 locations for public wireless networks. I think you see where it's coming from. But can you comment on that? I also had a question. 108 licenses you mentioned. Is that 108 locations? Is that were you happy with that response, or do you think that, maybe it's more difficult than it seems for private enterprise to go and get those licenses and actually put them to use?
Yeah, okay. No, it's 108 licenses are not 108 locations. One license can encompass, of course, more locations. And even if you say location, you always believe it's just one spot there and it's just one transmitter maybe from 5G. There are huge areas in German cities, and also I said the universities would like it as a campus network, so maybe they can also have a huge spot inside a city already available for 5G. With a lot of more locations on that one, and the 20,000 locations there are really the transmitting sites for the mobile network operators. So that's clear. Well, what we expected on that one, yeah, we are satisfied with it, but the question always there is interest in the spectrum, there is interest in the technology. But when people then started to roll out their own network and they haven't been in touch with wireless networks before or only with Wi-Fi networks, they really discovered a lot of new challenges in order to roll out such technology. And that puts a little bit of barrier on that one. But there is still huge interest. So we are receiving more applications at the moment for this spectrum, and we expect that this is going forward. The other aspect on that one is, and that's a little bit in contradiction to what was Stuart saying, was that this kind of licensing on the local basis, and those people who would like to have their control of their own network, incentivized others to think of it and move then to the mobile network operators and say, hey, we would like to have our 5G networks downwards in 3.4, 3.7. So there is some kind of push to this business model of sharing or maybe providing network sliced experience also to others as well. And this kind of parallel movement from both sides really accelerates the deployment of 5G in Germany quite a lot from our understanding.
So are you saying that it incentivizes users to say, yeah, I'd like to do that, but it's too much trouble for me to do my own private networks. Maybe I can go to the MNO and with the capabilities of network slicing and all of that, I can have my own private network, and that's more attractive. So I think
that's the decision they have to take. If you would like to have as a vertical really your own network, you have to decide you would like to have it operated by someone else, but you have your own capacity sliced there by a contract. Or you have to do all the technical experience and work it out on your own way. So that's the question they have to take. And from our understanding, they are quite happy now with this possibility to have at least also the opportunity to use broader channels than 20 megahertz or 40 megahertz. And that's a similar thing. And I just read the question here from the audience for 26 gigahertz. There are also people believing that there could be a similar approach there. I do not have specific use cases there yet, but it moves into the same direction, and the interest is moving into the same direction as for 3.7, 3.8.
Okay. All right. And Christina, you've had some experience at Ofcom with shared licenses. Can you talk to that? I think you've seen a good response, or was it mixed? Or can you expand on that? We don't hear you. Sorry.
Sorry. Need to. Yes, sorry, Joanne. Yes, we've seen a good response, as I was saying, around similar number, just less than 100 different licenses. A license can book over a wide area. We got different type of licenses in share access, or they can be done based by the state, depends on whatever is the requirement of a use case down there. We've seen variety of uses as well, different industry sectors. We have, of course, supported all of the DCMS, our department for culture, media, and sport in the test beds and trials. So agree with what Alex has just said with regards to all of the different business models, and for us the importance to enable all of those business models. And I see a question there as well: how do you then meet the digital divide with spectrum? So for us, it was really providing the spectrum where it's needed, and we've seen instances actually in which an MNO has provided a fully network, the spectrum. Challenge channel, but a fully private spec network for one of our customers. So quite a variety of use cases out there.
Okay. I guess, I'm sorry, Christine, I think you were cutting out, so I'm not sure that I understood or heard all of your answer. But I know you did mention to allocate spectrum in a way to close the digital divide. I don't know if anyone cares to comment on this. We have a question here from the audience. Meta, you mentioned that the difficulties in covering many areas in Slovenia because of the national parks, the mountains, and all that. Can you expand on that for 5G? I mean, I know we're talking mid-band. It's so important to 5G, millimeter wave. But my God, how are you going to provide broad coverage even with mid-band? It's really difficult. So can you expand on that? I think we're losing. Oh, Christina, you were going, but you're back. Meta,
yes.
Sorry, everyone. I've lost you all for a moment. No idea what happened.
That's okay. But I will let Meta please talk maybe about what Slovenia is doing to close the digital divide with spectrum for 5G. I mean, I know we talk about all these applications, urban, it's great industry, but what about coverage in the rural or difficult areas?
Thank you, Joanna. This is really a challenge. I mean, here the low bands are very important. In Slovenia, we have with LTE around 99% of coverage of population and around 90% of territory. But still, there are mountains, there are national parks, and so on. Therefore, Slovenia is very much interested in Agenda Item 1.5. We are interested of allocating spectrum for mobile primary use because as well a lot of all Slovenian mobile operators are as well fixed operators, and they are using 4Play and providing excellent coverage as well with broadcasting. But with regards to the C-bands, yeah, it is a challenge. So we didn't require coverage obligation of population or a territory with these bands, but only the cities and the main transport path. But for 26, we don't have any obligations because we believe that it will be covered where it's needed, especially in this area with dense population or where you need gigabit speeds and so on. And perhaps for fixed wireless access, as you have in Canada and US.
Yeah, there's a fair amount of fixed wireless. I think it's in that band that can be used. But are you saying that you're interested in the lower band, the UHF or 600 megahertz for 5G
exactly.
for the next radio conference?
Yes, I think that we in Finland are supporting this, but I don't know for the rest.
Okay, so that's certainly one of the subjects, we thought we would touch. I guess, Stuart, there's already a lot of equipment out there that supports the 600 band, right? Because of the US, Canada, and other countries.
Yes, that's right. So there's quite a lot of terminals, actually. So a lot of support for 600, 700, 800 megahertz in the terminals. So, intuitively, it seems quite surprising, but yeah, there's a lot of support for the terminals within the low bands.
Yeah, I know it's available. So if EU member countries would want to move to or free up that band for that purpose, where it can be done in a reasonable time frame, the equipment is not an issue to provide better coverage. I don't know if anybody cares to comment on the rural or the digital divide with 5G, because I think the digital divide with 5G may become a bigger barrier with 5G than it has been. So, Alex, please go.
Okay, now unmute. Thank you. Well, I think we need to think about different perspectives here. What 5G is not the normal rollout like for the 4G or for 3G on that one. So it's not only terrestrial. What we see here, terrestrial, maybe also in a wider way. Well, we've discussed hubs opportunities in order to use fixed connections and bring then the connectivity to rural spots in a much better way and with much more reliability than before due to the ground, and maybe also economically more feasible. We have the discussion now at the WRC also on HIPs, so also mobile stations which are flying around, being in the air, and therefore have also better coverage in total, maybe in the rural areas. So that needs to be taken into account as well. And finally, as I said, due to the 5G convergence, also the satellite industry is looking into that very intensively in order to make use of the equipment available in the grounds of the mobile handsets. And maybe there is some convergence also regards to these services, that the satellite industry provides then the coverage and the connectivity to a certain spot, but the distribution will then be made by mobile 5G technology, and you will have no technology break point in that kind of service. If that's the business model and we find something, then we can also have a huge benefit to bridging the digital divide.
Okay, so a key role for satellite here. Well, that's interesting. So maybe let's move into the second poll we had was on the millimeter wave, 26 gigahertz. And when do you expect 26 gigahertz will be widely deployed in the EU? So not that much love. Within 3 years, not 1 year, 3 years, 13%. 3 to 5 years, 37%. Later than 2026, my goodness, 47% will never be a key band. Okay, only 3%. So not a lot of love here. So does that explain, Alexander, why you don't have you didn't go ahead with auctions for exclusive spectrum in the millimeter wave, or is it because the FCC made so little money with their auctions that you guys weren't interested?
Well, we are bound by law on that one, and the law was clear. Do we have abundance of spectrum or scarcity of spectrum? And if we have scarcity, we need to move for this specific award proceeding, so the auction. And for 26 gigahertz, we saw, okay, you have huge bandwidth available. We have a lot of reusage possibilities in there. It's more for local usages or for fixed wireless access. There are plenty of opportunities in order to bring together something that we believe that, okay, we won't have any scarcity here. So there is no justification for an auction, and therefore we said, okay, then look into something specific. Do we can do it in a general authorization? And there we saw no, due to the existing services in the band, we need to have a certain insurance of their protection as well, even if many of these usages belong to fixed links, which is operated by the mobile network operators. So therefore, we need to work further in order to ensure the satellite spots to be protected. And then the result of that kind of thinking was clear that we have some kind of licensing regime which is moving forward, but which not set a barrier on anything. And personal view on that one, well, we would like to have a deployment in 26. So why should we take away investment money which can move into the network? Okay.
So there's a question on how you dealt with pricing of that spectrum in millimeter wave. So is it free, or is it an administrative cost, or did you actually?
No, we have some kind of administrative incentive pricing formula for 3738, and a similar one for 26 gigahertz as well. Please look to our website where the formula is available. Unfortunately, only in German. I pushed my colleagues to make this page available in English as well. But if the person is also willing to get more information on that one, please contact me and I will provide some.
Okay, no problem.
It's clear. It depends on the spectrum you would like to use, and it depends on the area you would like to cover. So if you have a large area to cover with 26 and you the full 3 gigahertz available, then it will be a huge cost. So we have pricing in 3738 from I think it's 1,000 euros or even below that to over 1 million.
Okay. All right. Okay. And you pricing was developed based on the value of the applications, or did you use any benchmarking to the extent?
Yeah, we used the benchmarking of fixed wireless access, where we have some experiences in 3.6, and we extrapolated that a little bit further.
Okay. Anybody else care to comment on pricing for shared spectrum, for example, in millimeter wave? Christina, Meta, any comment on that?
Yes, we've made available the 26 gigahertz on an administrative cost basis. So it's only indoor to start with, and it's a license cost of £320. So it's a relative. We decided to sort of really stimulate some sort of innovation in this band with an administrative cost. But I also appreciate it's indoor, so different.
Yeah, just for indoor. Yeah. Uh-huh. What about, well, Meta, you're going to an auction probably, or I guess that's what you're planning to do, right?
Yes, we will auction for the moment, but we are thinking as well of make it possible to have similar approach as Germany or UK. And for that purpose, we are thinking of having similar approach for these licenses as for calculation of reserve price. Which is based on 4 criteria, and it's as well based on population cover and the bandwidth and the value of spectrum and so on. So we are still looking forward into this, and we are thinking of taking something similar as we already have, and maybe look at the UK and the German model to possibly adjust.
Okay. I know we have about 5 minutes left. Maybe I know there's a question on and we're going to go back to spectrum sharing, but a question on spectrum sharing, has it been fully defined among MNOs, IMT, and the military, for example? Does it mean co-use or primary, secondary usage? And how is interference dealt with? And I think I'd like to bring that question in from Kenneth Warford of NATO, but I'd like to bring that question also in the fact that I know, Stuart, on your chart, you had the C-band from 3.3 to 4.2. There's a lot of different usage right now of 3.3 to 3.4, and maybe we can discuss that in the context of this band, where sometimes it is often used by also the airline industry, aviation industry, military. Is there any kind of definition of what spectrum sharing? I would say there is not. There's all kinds of spectrum sharing or network sharing, but maybe someone can. Stuart, would you like to go ahead on that, or?
I guess this is focused on maybe Europe this session, and the regulators made it abundantly clear what the sharing conditions are within 3.3 to 3.4, and so we're looking above 3.4, so it's very, very challenging below 3.4.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I think, looking forward, maybe very long term, it will be very interesting to see whether some of the military type of spectrum can be shared with other users. If you have clever databases and what have you, is that an option in the future? I don't know. Okay. To be specific on your question, below 3.4 is very tricky
very tricky, yeah.
The world, yeah.
Right. Anybody else care to comment on this below 3.4, or it's a lost cause for the moment? What about 3.8 to? Well, there's been some discussion of 3.8 to 4.2. So, and as we know, the U.S. has awarded 280 megahertz from 3.7 to 3.98. So 280 results awarded yesterday. There were some questions on comments on the results of the C-band. As you know, it's very expensive. It's $81 billion in the auction, and if you add the relocation costs, it's close to the $100 billion total cost for the auction. Yesterday, the FCC revealed that Verizon has they've bought more than 50% of the spectrum, and for $45 billion, and they essentially have about an average of 170 megahertz in each area of the US. And of course, I'll go back to my spectrum sharing comment. I think that shows that they're very big. They've bought. If Verizon actually has bought shared spectrum under PAL licensing, about 35 megahertz on average, where they bought it, but they've bought 170 megahertz of exclusive spectrum for a much higher price. So it seems to be, I think, divergence of views maybe between regulators and a carrier in this sense on spectrum sharing. Am I right to think that, or and this? if someone can actually put their hands on a large amount of exclusive spectrum, can they beat out their competitors, and you end up with less competition in a few years, than if you have spectrum sharing, or vice versa? Can anyone comment on that? We just have a few minutes left, I think. 2 minutes. Closing statements. Spectrum sharing versus exclusive for 5G. Here you go. Any thoughts, Meta? Go ahead.
Yes, I believe that operators are very much interested in the exclusive spectrum, especially for 5G, this critical vertical support. They really need spectrum without interference and so on. But on the other hand, and for them it's valuable to have as less competition as possible, because then they could have higher prices. But regulators need to see that this is balanced. We believe that some exclusive spectrum for operator is needed, but in the areas where this spectrum is not used, perhaps this model like UK has is very good solution. But it depends on the progress of country. For example, in our legislation for the moment, this would be difficult, but we have allowed in the 26 gigahertz band this pooling, active sharing, and not just between the operators, but as well between operator and possibly Z of spectrum vertical. So we'll see what happened, and maybe this could be a future model.
All right. Just 30 seconds, Christina, Alexander, and Stuart, we're being pressed to conclude an excellent session. So maybe Christina, if you want to go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. On your last question, I think you need both. You need some exclusive. We don't have exclusive licenses. You need nationwide. You need shared. You need local. I think it's really important to make sure that different type of spectrum are made available for different uses to meet all of the demand.
Okay, three points from my side. Sharing is the trend. Exclusive spectrum is something that we will see in the higher bands. We will see more sharing. And one point to the US auction on that one. Well, look back in Germany 2000 for 3G spectrum. There was a high price, and we discussed exactly the same things. And it didn't turn out to be the best way to pay so much money in order to delay then the deployment.
No, I remember that.
Let's keep focused and have a look on that one, how Verizon will go forward with their US.
I know, a high price and then a high capex coming. It's not a done deal. Stuart, the last word. You have the last word.
Thank you. So I think there'll be a combination emerging. I think there'll be a combination in Europe of national type licensing, but shared spectrum as well. And let's make sure we get the scale, and we need the mobile operators in the middle of all of that. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope the audience has enjoyed this session. I think we've had an excellent session. On this last question and on your comments, Alex, I think the markets aren't open in North America yet. We'll see what happens to Verizon stock price this morning. And and hopefully it will be something better will happen there than what happened in Germany after the 3G auction. But they had paid more in Germany, right? They had paid even more per megahertz pop than it was paid. So Dan, back to you.
Joanne, thank you so much. And yeah, sorry again to have to wrap this up. We could have, I keep saying this after every session, but it's true. We could definitely have carried on the discussion for a lot longer. So sorry that we've had to wrap that up. But thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you to Joanne for expertly moderating that session as well. So a really excellent discussion. Well, thank you. So we now have around about a 20-minute or so break. So we're back here on the main stage in 20 minutes time for our final session at 2:20 CET. So we're going to be first of all hearing about plans for delivering connectivity for 5G in the US and in Saudi Arabia. So two perspectives from outside Europe. And then we come back for our final session, which is going to be looking at looking a little bit further forward. So looking at spectrum bands, key bands, but beyond 5G, and maybe even looking towards 6G as well. So don't go away, stay for that. And then finally, I should say, immediately following that, we have our closing ceremony for the conference as well. So we're going to be hearing key conclusions from Peter Stuckman from the Commission and a lot of industry perspectives as well. We also want to hear from you on what your final thoughts and things are during that conclusion session, and we'll be finishing off with some live music. So we have, which always challenges us technically. So hopefully that will all work. So hopefully we'll have some live music to finish things off as well. But in the meantime, 20 minutes or so to go and stretch your legs and to grab a coffee, and we'll see you back here on the main stage at about 20 past. And thanks again to all of our panelists in that last session. Thank you all. See you shortly.